Hello there, and welcome to Wildcard Decks, where we go through decks with leaders and cards that are less used or not forming a part of a main meta, to my knowledge. The link to today's deck, as always, can be found in the description below, along with my profile if you want to view all my other decks. So today, we're going through a Lando red deck. It does have space in the title. It's not actually dominating space, but it is pretty evenly split between the ground and space. But it's a bit different in that the main intended form of attack is taking place in space whilst defending the ground arena. Not many decks go heavy in space, which can make this quite problematic for your opponent to deal with. One of the main themes of the deck is continuous plays. So basically, this is partly due to Lando's ability, which we'll get onto, but also three other cards in Wanted, Smuggling Compartment, and where is it? Coruscant Dissident, which I'll highlight separately as well. Sequencing of plays and choosing which resources to exhaust is really important in this deck. It's not often that you'll have the initiative because we'll be using his action, we'll be doing multiple plays in a phase, etc., and possibly attacking with multiple different units in a phase. So quite action heavy, so not likely to have the initiative very often. So if we have a look at the numbers of the deck, I think I usually go through the leader first, but never mind. As you can see, the unit split 18 ground and 15 in space, so very, very evenly split. We've got a few upgrades, not many, and a few events as well, but majority of the deck is units. Resource cost, you can see, very cheap overall. We have a few 4 resource plays, one 6 resource play, and a lot of these will have different costs depending on if they are being smuggled out, if they are being smuggled out using Lando's ability. So this graphing of itself isn't perhaps entirely reflective of reality, but there it is. And in terms of rarity, again, mostly common and uncommon, a decent number of rares, no legendaries whatsoever. So again, I would say relatively plausible to put together. So Lando himself, I think like a lot of people, when he was first shown, I thought he was rubbish, and I think a lot of people wrote him off. Defeating a resource to be able to smuggle something for 2 less does sound like a really, really bad trade-off. However, this deck, and for this leader in general, having a lot of low resource cost cards, you can actually hover around 3 to 5 resources in total for the game, and it doesn't really restrict him too much. When using his smuggle ability as well, choosing the resources that you exhaust is actually very important, and I will go through a proper example in a bit. When you have 4 resources, he can be deployed. In terms of his stat line, it's not very good. 2 attack and 5 health, so he can be defeated with takedown, for example. If you put a upgrade on him, he does become a bit more problematic. One other thing to note as well is do not use his ability when you have 4 resources before deploying him. Otherwise, you've defeated a resource, you're stuck on 3 resources, and you're going to have to wait until the next phase to actually be able to put him out. So just something to remember, and is I admit I've done it once or twice when I first started using him. I was like, whoops. So yeah, his ability is also actually unchanged when he deploys. In theory, if you have enough resources, i.e., more than 4, you can deploy him and use his smuggle ability twice in the same phase, but it's not really likely and not worth it. The base that I use is Tarkin Town because we're quite interested in pretty much obliterating the ground arena. Let's say we're defending the ground. We have a few, so yeah, it's a good way to finish it off, and it combines well with the likes of Crafty Smuggler because that has a shield. It can get the damage going on a unit, finish it off with Tarkin Town, and your Crafty Smuggler is still around. So yeah, very useful. So the example that we're going to go through for smuggle resourcing is, let's say we want to smuggle out L3. So we've got 4 resources in total. One of them has Smuggle. L3 itself has Smuggle as well, and 2 resources that don't have Smuggle at all. So what you would do is play out L3 using Smuggle, and it's sideways, but using Lando's ability, it costs 2. So when smuggling, you can use the card that you're playing as a resource, so it's kind of paying for itself in a way. You will have to put the top card from your deck into play or into your resource pile exhausted. Ideally, you will exhaust, because we've only used 1 resource, so 1 from your deck doesn't count as a resource. That's been used to pay for what you've played, if that makes any sense. So you still have to exhaust one of your pre-existing resources, so you'll pick the no-smuggle option. And then you have to, because of Lando's ability, you have to defeat a resource. So you will defeat the resource, ideally, again, that does not have smuggle. This leaves you with a card that has smuggle, that is ready, and another resource with no smuggle, that is ready. So even though you've only got 3 resources and you've paid 2, defeated 1, you still have 2 resources that are ready to be played in the same phase. So it can be a bit fiddly, and it does take some getting used to with Lando, but yeah, choosing the resources that you're exhausting when playing anything, I would say, is actually very important. So for the wildcard section, there's actually 3 of them today because they all have similar effects and kind of synergize with what we're trying to do with deck in general. So wanted, got 2 of those. They are a 0 cost bounty, so it doesn't cost anything to play it out, which is very useful. And when you claim the bounty, you can ready 2 friendly resources. So this ties into the theme of the deck of being able to play multiple things in a phase and more things than you would otherwise be able to. With Tarkin Town as well, this gives more potential to be able to claim the wanted bounty. So yeah, very good. We have Smuggling Compartment, we've got 2 of those, and this basically turns any of your vehicles into a Coruscant Dissident, because when the vehicle attacks, then you can ready a resource. So let's say you have a ready space unit out, you play the Smuggling Compartment on it, it only costs 1, you then attack with that space unit, you ready a resource, it's paid for itself, so it's very useful in that sense. If you've got more than 1, or this and a Coruscant Dissident out at the same time, then you can resource up to 2. You can ready up to 2 resources in a phase, which, you know, especially in this deck, is extremely useful and goes a long way to negating the fact that with Lando, you're going to be hovering around 3 to 5 resources throughout the whole game. Coruscant Dissident, we've got 3 of those. If not dealt with, then, as I say, it can create very good value for you. It can be providing you an extra play in the phase that you otherwise may not have. It's actually a heroism unit as well, and spoiler alert, we do have Red 3 coming up later on, so Coruscant Dissident actually benefits from the Raid 1 gifting of Red 3, so it's a nice bonus there as well. So onto the ground units, and I've split them into what is not smuggleable and smuggleable, so it's a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, so Crafty Smuggler, got just for 2 of those. It's not smuggleable, but with what we're trying to do on the ground of defending it, it can get the damage going. It can trade upwards because it can deal 4 in total because of its shield. So yeah, very useful. Gamorrean Guards, we've got 2 of those. It's a 4 cost unit, so one of the more expensive cards that we've got in this deck. It is a conditional sentinel, so you do have to have another yellow or cunning unit out, but we do have quite a good number of those in the deck, and Lando himself is a yellow unit, so when he's out you can play this the same phase, and yeah, it'll have Sentinel. Karrde is an interesting one because with her ability She can delay your opponent from playing anything that would provide a significant swing depending on the matchup. And even if it doesn't delay, it could mean that the card that you named is the only thing they would be able to play and nothing else. One thing that I think is perhaps overlooked with Kira is that whilst it says look at an opponent's hand, then name a card, it doesn't say it has to be a card in their hand. So if you have a look at it and you're thinking, oh, I'm not too fussed about what they've got in there, you could name something completely different. Now, obviously, if you name something in their hand, you are getting immediate value out of this. But if you're playing, for example, against a green villainy deck, then Overwhelming Barrage is something that puts the Fear of God into everyone, I think. So you could name that instead, because they might draw it the next phase, you don't know. And Overwhelming Barrage will cost 8. So yeah, it's quite a flexible card. You don't have to name something in their hand, but generally that is going to be the best option. I guess other examples could be if you're against Heroism Red. If they have, well, you're probably expecting Rekka, maybe Poe Dameron. Those are other good targets to name for Kira when she's out. The effect is only while she's in play, so if she's waylaid or defeated, then that effect is lifted. But hopefully they will have to have spent resources to get rid of her, meaning they still can't play the card that you had named anyway, if that makes sense. So on to the ground units that can be smuggled, and we've got 3 L3s. So she's basically a crafty smuggler with an added bonus of you can rescue a captured card instead of putting a shield on her. Now capture doesn't come up very often, so 99 cases out of 100 you're going to pick the shield option, but it's a nice option to have if you do need it. She can be smuggled for 4. If you use Lando's ability, then she can be smuggled out for 2, which is her normal deployment cost. Cassian Andor, I would say, is pretty essential for a Lando deck because when you smuggle him out, he comes in ready. So that's an extra 3 damage in the phase than you otherwise would have been able to achieve, and something that your opponent may not be able to stop. I have actually won some games just playing him out and getting that extra damage in to get me over the line in that phase because the opponent has already made all their plays, used all their resources, couldn't do anything about it. He just rocks up, 3 damage, wins a game. It's very satisfying when you do that. Tech. So Tech is a interesting one for Lando. He's a free cost normally, normal deployment. Stat line's not great. 5 health is quite useful, but he can also be smuggled out for a 4 cost or using Lando's ability. He only costs 2, which is actually cheaper than his normal deploy. There are a few cards in the game that are like this. Not many in this deck, but it's interesting to note. But basically, he gives every resource smuggle, so anything can be smuggled out. So if we go back to these cards, if you have Kira in your resources and Tech is deployed, you can smuggle her out for a cost of 6 overall because it adds 2 cost onto it. But with Lando's ability, you can cancel that extra 2 cost out and she still only costs 4 even though she's been smuggled. So Tech basically extends your hand. Really useful, works really well with Lando. So yeah. Principled Outlaw, got just for 1. This is a great unit for defending the ground due to being able to exhaust any ground unit on attack. This most significantly does not exclude leaders. So as he costs 4 resources, you're likely to be able to get this out before a leader deploys. Attack anything, and you can exhaust the leader. Really useful, and with Lando's ability, it can be smuggled out for 4 rather than 6, which again is its normal deployment cost. Onto the space units that do not have smuggle, and we've got 3 cartel turncoats. It's a 1 cost unit, just helps if you've got the smuggling compartment, if you've got it already in resources, synergy going, then this can be a play that you would be able to get out that you might otherwise not have been able to. It's decent stats with the drawback of a bounty, which is draw a card. It's not a bounty we're particularly worried about. We're also, with Lando, you will pretty much always have card advantage in a way anyway, because of all the smuggle options that you've got, especially if tech is out as well. So yeah, we're not too fussed if the opponent is drawing cards. Green Squadron A-Wing, it's a red staple for heroism, let's be honest. He's able to hit the 3 when attacking. Not much more to say really. Grey Squadron Y-Wing, I think this works really well in this deck because on attack, the opponent chooses a unit or a base and you can deal 2 damage to it. It's not often you're going to not want to deal 2 damage unless that unit has grit, but otherwise you'll be quite happy to. Interestingly, with Tarkintown, then if they do choose a unit, you might be able to finish it off with Tarkintown. If they choose a base, then it's basically just another A-Wing. It's hitting for 3, so really useful. Another heroism red staple is Red 3, and basically it provides Raid 1 to every other heroism unit. Most of this deck is heroism units, and you can see on this page that every unit here is heroism. So you've got a lot of targets that will benefit from this. And in fact, I think it is only Crafty Smuggler and Gamorrean Guards in this deck that are not heroism. So yeah, pretty much every unit is going to benefit from this. Now, Valiant Assault Ship, we've got 2 of those, and this can be a bit of a powerhouse. It doesn't look like it because it does only have 3 power, and it's 4 cost, but importantly, on attack, if a defending player controls more resources than you, this unit gets +2 for this attack. So it's actually hitting for 5, and it has Saboteur as well, so Sentinels aren't going to stop it either. Now, if you're keeping up with your opponent's resources, then they may not be too worried about this, understandably. But if you use Lando's ability mid-phase to smuggle anything out, you're having to defeat a resource, all of a sudden, this ship has got an extra 2 when it attacks. So a good example is if you smuggled out with Lando's ability, spoiler alert, armed to the teeth, then in one play, you've boosted it by 2 with armed to the teeth, and also boosted it by 2 by defeating a resource. So +4 attack with 1 play. Pretty useful. So in terms of the smuggleable space units, there is just the 1, and it is, of course, the Millennium Falcon Lando version. It's a 5/5. If you play it from your hand, it gains ambush. It's not likely to happen because it is a 6 resource unit, and we're not often going to get to that point with Lando or want to keep that many resources around. But when you smuggle, its normal cost would be 6, same as it deploys, but with Lando's ability, it can cost 4. So a 5/5 in space for 4 resources is pretty useful. But as I say, do only have 1 of those in the deck because the main aim is to make multiple plays in a phase. Onto the events, and we've got a good few in here. So we've got 2 disarms. I think this is not really widely used, and I think it is slept on quite a lot, but it's a really good cheap option to prevent damage to your base or to assist with killing a unit whilst keeping your own units alive. My favourite use for this is to basically neutralise leaders, because a lot of them without upgrades, when they deploy, trying to think off the top of my head, there's probably 1 or 2, but most of them will not have any power. So then whatever ground presence you've got, just hit them and get rid of them whilst taking no damage yourself. Really useful. Swoop down, got 3 of those because we've got a very good space presence. And this is a card that's not particularly used much either, but basically the space unit you pick, it gains Saboteur, which if you just want to get into base and close out the game, very useful. But its main use is to, if you know the unit strafing gunship, it basically turns it into one of them for the phase. So you can attack a ground unit, your space unit gets a 2 power bonus, and the defender gets a -2 penalty for the attack. So helps to keep your space units alive, helps to keep the ground clear, which is one of the main things we're trying to do with the deck. Keep the ground clear, which is where most decks place their focus. Keep your units alive and just chip away at the base as we go along. Surprise Strike, you can't generally go with a yellow deck without this. Not much to be said. Good action economy, get a 3+ bonus for the attack. So let's say you've got the aforementioned Valiant Assault Ship. You've got less resources than your opponent, so it already has 5 when it's attacking. Slap Surprise Strike, it hits for 8. And let's say you've got red 3 out as well, then it's hitting for 9. A bit ridiculous. Spare the target, we've got 2 of those. This is basically a better waylay in that you collect any bounties that are on the opponent's unit at the same time. So if we've got Wanted, the only bounty that we do have, then you're claiming 2 resources after playing this and collecting the bounty. Therefore, in effect, it's only costing 1, which is not too bad at all. So for upgrades, ignoring Wanted, which we went over earlier, we do have just the 2. So Arm to the Teeth, we've got 2 of those. It boosts the unit's power by 2, which is pretty good, but when it attacks, you give another friendly unit +2 as well. With this deck, as we've got a lot of cheap plays, you're likely to have more than 1 unit out at any one time. So you're going to be in a good spot to be able to benefit from this. Good targets are any shielded units, so we've got Crafty Smuggler and L3, but also with Jetpack. When you first play that in the phase, the unit gets shielded and then it disappears after that phase, so that would also be a target to give that benefit to. Another less perhaps situational target would be Gamorrean Guards. Give it 6 attack, so if it has Sentinel, it's going to be likely killing whatever is going to attack into it. I would say Lando is probably the best guy to attach this to because he's immune to stuff like Frozen in Carbonite, Waylay, the insta-kill cards apart from Rivals, Fall and Takedown. And then yeah, it can be smuggled for 4, but with Lando's ability, it can be smuggled for 2, which is its normal play cost. I kind of just already covered Jetpack, but it fits with the theme of trying to defend the ground because you can slap this on a unit, give it +2 power, it is shielded, attack into whatever you want, the shield goes, your unit remains undamaged. So really useful with what we're trying to do. This is the sideboard or other options that I could think of. So we've got some Daring Raid. Deal 2 damage to a unit or base. So combined with Tarkin Town, you can basically take out any 5 health unit with this alone, essentially. 2 actions and it's gone. Hotshot Blaster. I would say this is probably in most Lando decks. I prefer the jetpack option, but if you want to go more aggressive or your action economy is not keeping up with your opponent and they're kind of getting rid of your units before you can do what you want, then this could be subbed in for the jetpack or Arm to the Teeth. In Lando's, with Lando's ability, it can be smuggled out for 1. So yeah, being able to attack out of the blue with a unit, with a ground unit that is, for 1 with +2 power, very useful. Snapshot Reflexes, similar kind of theme to Hotshot Blaster. If your action economy is not working for you, then yeah, this is a good cheap upgrade to be able to play. And Leia Organa, if you want to go completely all in on the readying resources, then you could add her in. She's also really good for defending the ground as well because you can exhaust a unit, and again, it's not restricted by non-leader, so that is the main target for that sort of thing. But a good example for the ready resource, turn 1, play her ready resource, and then put out a cartel turncoat, and then you've got 2 units out in 2 different arenas already, which is really good. So, yeah. That is the deck. As I say, he can be quite a tricky leader to use, and he does take some practice, but with the cheaper and continuous plays, with the wanted Coruscant, Dissident, and what was the other one? Smuggling Compartment. You've got a lot of ready and resourcing potential, and if you've got loads of smuggle options in your resources, then yeah, you can be playing 3, 4 different cards in a phase, which is a bit nuts. And then yeah, with a heavy presence in both arenas possible, it's quite tricky to deal with. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more like this, then do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.